This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Between two-factor authentication, strong passwords, and a VPN, you try to be in control of how your info is protected. But many other places also have it, and they might not be as careful. That's why LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/podcast for 40% off. Terms apply.
So, as you both touched on the screaming, often I hear people dismiss it. It doesn't seem like they understand why all of these young girls were screaming and why some of them still want to. Obviously, you weren't going to be able to hear the Beatles very well over the waves of screams, but as you said, Debbie, you weren't there necessarily to hear the Beatles. So why the screaming? What does the screaming symbolize?
Now, wait a minute. Can I break in here?
Yeah,
You've seen me a couple of times through this conversation. Just something that Deb says or a thought, and I'm just,
mm-hmm.
So it's not like, oh, I'm going to go there and scream. It's an overwhelming emotion.
Mm-hmm.
That I still feel. Like when she was describing it, I think back and I got my stuff out. Yeah, I could feel it building. And when she said a minute ago that she met them, touched their hands, I was overwhelmed. And so I think it was just that it's almost more than you can take at times because of the intensity of the feeling. I remember thinking there was people kept talking about the screaming. That wasn't the thing. The thing was to be present with this thing. And then it was just this emotional response. So I didn't go there to scream and be a screaming girl. I went there to be a part of this thing that had overwhelmed me. It's like hard to explain. I know people who just do not have that emotional response.
Mm-hmm.
And I had it from the beginning. It grabbed in there. Over the years, I thought, why is it so powerful? Well, the music was great. That's one thing. It makes me feel like this is something, it feels personal. It reaches through the ether to give me a feeling of hopefulness. It's like food. It's like nourishment. It's the best high. And I just think that the emotion of the scream overwhelmed our capacity to manage it.
It was the love. It was the way we could show our love, our appreciation, our raw feelings for them. And you didn't go, as Carol said, you didn't go there with the intent, oh, I'm going to scream. I never went to one of these things and said, I'm going to be screaming. But literally, what else could you do when you saw them in front of you and you were there? Sit still and have no emotion? That would take a superhuman force to just sort of sit there like in the little white gloves and like be like, no way. But you didn't go to say, I'm going to be screaming. It was an emotion and a response that just emanates from you and comes out. And that's what it is. You're showing your love, and that's what everyone really has to understand.
Yeah.
It's funny because my sister took us to the concert. And of course, she wasn't screaming and she was just like looking around. If you didn't love the Beatles, if you weren't into it, my sister was like, 4? She was like 6 years older than me and she was not into it at all. So of course, she sat there the whole time, like, had something else on her mind and was just trying to babysit us because we didn't drive yet.
Right.
And so she wasn't into it. So of course, she had her arms folded and was stupid. So if you didn't love them, you're not going to care. You were not going to have the reaction. So this was love. This was like, I'm on board, baby. I'm a believer. I'm here with you.
I have to say that both of your responses makes me emotional just listening to what you guys have to say. Love is definitely still there, and it's very joyful. And thank you both for sharing that.
Hello and welcome to SATB 227A. The girls get back. The first half of our conversation. This will be a two-parter, not a three-parter, as they've been of late. And what we have here is some returning guests. 3 of my favorite ladies that have ever graced the SATB virtual stage. The first being Debbie Gendler, who was the 13-year-old in 1963 that had a friend coming from a trip to England bringing her a copy of the Please Please Me album in the spring of '63 before anybody knew what it was in America or had heard of the Beatles, really, apart from maybe the people at VJ Records at that point, which wasn't doing great business. But they did get airplay in Chicago, I'm proud to say. In any event, she was very smitten with what she heard and what she saw on the album cover and began writing to England in the hopes of connecting with a fan club or getting permission to start one up here. She does tell her story in the previous episode that she was featured on. That was SATB 121 from 2017. We had connected through Andrew Salt, the TV and film documentary producer, director, writer, and good friend, introducing me to his good friend. So we got Debbie on the show in 2017 to tell her story. I don't think anybody can legitimately take away the title from her of the first American Beatle fan. Maybe the definitive aspect of it being February 9th, 1964, when the Beatles performed live on Ed Sullivan's stage in New York. The first cutaway to the audience you see is dark-haired Deb Gendler, 13 years old, holding her hand up to her face in just shock and amazement and disbelief and everything else you can imagine, because she was one of the few who got admitted to that very small venue for that first historic performance. So check out that show, and there will be more things from her telling her story to come, he said cryptically. And anyway, I had her on a show then, and my other guest that you may be aware of from her appearance on Something About the Beatles is Carol Tyler, cartoonist, writer extraordinaire. She, likewise, was 12 when the Sullivan Show happened, and that sort of codified her fandom, hearing I Want to Hold Your Hand and then seeing that performance. So 2 women among the 73 million first-generation fans, first-generation American fans, how their lives were changed by their love for the Beatles. Carol came to the show a year after Deb in 2018 upon the publication of her memoir, Fab Four Mania. And because she is an artist by trade, and you can imagine the skill set she had going back to childhood, she was diarying and drawing the Beatles back then, and she kept her notes of her fandom, which culminated, for the purposes of her book, in seeing the Beatles in the '65 tour at White Sox Park in her native Chicago. The same week that Deb saw the tour kick off at Shea Stadium, which of course was filmed and broadcast, Carol in Chicago got to see the evening show of August 20th, 1965 at White Sox Park. So here you have the 2 first-generation fans who were witnesses to the Beatles, and it stayed with them, changed their life for the whole of their career. And so individually they were on the show. And then a year ago, they were part of Fab Four Con Jam when there was a panel moderated by your friend and mine, newly crowned PhD, Alison Bumstead. Another one of my favorite guests on the show, who you may remember from the 2-part episode we did in 2019 that was critiquing the critics, a case study with Wings that was part of her research on the rock critic ideology of the 60s and 70s. So that became part of her, well, it did become her PhD thesis, which eventually will be published. And you have that to look forward to. Anyway, Alison did a fantastic job last year talking with these ladies as part of Fab Four Con Jam. I Was a Teenage Screamer was the name of that presentation. And basically it got into the lives of, when you watch the old films, the Beatle concerts, all those screaming fans, these were human beings with lives and thoughts and insights and everything else, and not just these empty-headed people as they've been often characterized by the male writers that are chronicling the Beatles. There's way more going on with them, and Alison did a great job of presenting that with the stories of Carol and Debbie together on a panel. So here we are a year later, and I'd been dying to get these guys back on the show, all of them, and Get Back gave us the perfect opportunity for that. It's the gift that keeps on giving, And I really wanted to get the point of view of first generation fans, as well as latter generation fans, as represented by Allison, on what their takeaway was from the Get Back doc. That was the point of this discussion. At the onset of the show, that was a clip from last year's conversation with Allison, Deb, and Carol. That will be put up on the YouTube channel, the Fab 4Con Jam channel, where Sappy Raw resides, and the Peter Jackson stuff. There'll be a lot more video coming as quickly as I can turn it around, but you'll see some clips from their conversation there as well, which was amazing. We wanted to get going with this show while everything was still fresh and get their perspectives, and there will be more. But I think generally, the female fandom perspective is something that's been underrepresented, with mostly, almost entirely, male writers chronicling the Beatles story. And a major corrective, or at least a filling of that major gap, came last year with the publication of Christine Feldman Barrett's volume, A Woman's History of the Beatles. And she is going to be on Sappy very soon. So we're really trying to bring more to the table in terms of insight and getting all perspectives of the history as best we can. The Beatles narrative for a long time was dominated by certain tropes, and in recent years we've seen a lot of fresh looking at the stuff. Certainly Sappy's been working that mine for some time, and bringing fresh perspectives to the table. And no doubt influenced by Aaron Weber's book on the Beatles and the Historians, using that historiography discipline, examining the source materials in the Beatles narrative, in their story, and just trying to get the history right. That's what we strive to do on Sappy. That's where the telling of their story seems to be going these days. And as this year unfolds, you will be seeing more stuff coming out, being made public, that will be bringing these points of view to the public, to you, the listeners and readers. And more than that, I cannot say. But just stay tuned. Stuff is coming. Stuff is happening. And in any event, I'm going to get out of the way and let you enjoy the conversation with three great ladies, Carol, Deb, and Allison.
Robert and I were talking earlier about the fact that as first-gen fans, you've seen Let It Be and Get Back in real time. So going back to Let It Be, what were your perceptions at the time in the very beginning when Let It Be was released?
Well, when Let It Be came out, I was already in college, and it was sort of like it was a rite of passage for all of us who were first there as first generation Beatle fans and everything. I think that we could understand the fact that maybe everything sort of comes to an end. Our lives changed too. We moved from high school screaming fans to being older. And so I looked at that original Let It Be, and I did see the sadness that everyone saw. I felt the sadness of losing my heroes as far back as I could remember. But I also respected the fact that everyone has to grow up, move on, and have different lives. And if this is the way it was going to be, that was it. So I wasn't devastated by it. However, when the headlines came out, the Beatles are over, as much as you think it wouldn't be devastating, it was, because it meant the finality to really what your youth was. So I had very mixed feelings about it. I loved watching it, but at the same time, I felt the sadness of then my youth gone, and here I was in college, and, it was really time to start thinking like an adult. So.
Was it at the show? Did we go to the movies to see it?
Yeah.
Yeah. When I think about that, I agree, that we kind of got to a place where we were not little girls anymore. We had gone to college or not, or had started our lives in some way. And I just sort of fogged it out because nobody wants to face the end of anything that's so great like that. And I just focused on the music, how it filtered in and out at different times, because there was a big difference of being an 8th grader and loving the Beatles and then going to high school and hearing the Beatles, and then leaving home and hearing the Beatles at different places, different experiences. And so, yeah, you're growing up, you're changing. I don't want to hear the micro mincing details like I would have in 8th grade. I'd want to know everything that happened. But by then it was like I had other concerns. It wasn't that I didn't love them. It's just like I didn't want to get into that. And their music played everything that came from, like my book leaves off at 65 when I saw them, and then I went off to high school, which is different than today. The kids today go to junior high and it kind of just goes right into high school. There was a big difference between being an 8th grader mentally, psychologically, physically, everything, and leaving that school and those people and going to high school. That was just a big break. But what happened between high school and college is a little bit more, like that, because so much had happened and there were so many changes. There had been assassinations and the politics in the world had changed so much. They were just kind of riding us through this, changing like we did, leading the way, and we were changing. And I didn't want to know about Get Back. I fogged it, or Let It Be. So I fogged that. Now, with Get Back, I went back to 8th grade. I don't know if it was the color, the clarity, but it affirmed all of the things that brought me there. I just didn't even think, I had never thought about Let It Be. But boy, that Get Back took me back. And it was still fresh, still wonderful. They were still great. Yes, I made the right decision. It wasn't even a decision. I signed up for the right team. Everything, it just affirmed everything in my being. I didn't see them with the rest of the junk from the late 60s. I didn't see them with the culture and all of that. They were there, fresh as ever.
It seems like this is my perception, not being of a first-generation fan, that you guys were like the optimum age to enter into the fandom at that point when music and discovering yourselves, as you guys said a year ago on the discussion with Allison, that you were sort of finding your own autonomy as fandom came into your life, and it was not your parents' music, it was not handed down culture, it was yours, and you guys ran with it. And you're on this sort of parallel journey with the Beatles of the innocent, exciting, exuberant music sort of coinciding with your exuberance of coming into your own at that age as a individual in the world. And by the time the Beatles are winding down, your life has changed
in so many ways.
So many ways, yes. On the path to turning into an adult. But it's like this parallel journey. It's like for people of that age group, maybe it's like the wind down of the Beatles happened at exactly the right time, where now you're at this fork in the road, you're becoming an adult, you're going to school, you're doing something else. I could see how tuning out Let It Be might have made sense at the time, because it is tied to the sadness, this sort of end point. The Beatles are ending. You've got that announcement with Paul's album coming out in April of 70, and the film follows a month later. So it's impossible to remove the sting of Let It Be in 1970 from the context of the breakup. It's not like it came out the summer of 69 when things were still flourishing and doing well. It's coinciding right on top of the breakup. And so therefore, it's going to be a sadness. It's going to be an end point. You experiencing it in 1970 can't help but be tied to this downbeat milestone. Yeah. And so 50 years on, they're still waiting for you to come back from a fresher place, to not have that breakup baggage. It's the Beatles. It's Thanksgiving weekend, and it's something that you were ready for when you did re-experience it. And I think that's the way the world was for not just first-generation fans, but people that, through the last 2 years of awfulness, the Beatles to the rescue once again.
When you saw Let It Be, I mean, obviously we're different generations. We're not first gen. So what was it like for you when you saw it?
I saw it as a midnight showing, and it became this sort of mythic thing because it wasn't like A Hard Day's Night or Help where you could see it on TV at least once a year, and Yellow Submarine even. So those films I was familiar with. Magical Mystery Tour was still kind of a mystery because it never was broadcast on American TV, at least not when I was becoming a fan. And so I'm pretty sure it was a double bill with Yellow Submarine, but it was definitely a midnight showing. So that in and of itself is a different experience than going to see the latest Star Wars or something like that where everybody's into it. It was kind of a niche thing that you had to seek out if you were hardcore. So presumably then you're in a room full of hardcore Beatle fans, because it's not like this is on every screen. It's a selective thing. Armed with years of conditioning that this is the sad story of the Beatles breaking up, that's the sensibility that you come into it with, and that's what you expect to see, and it becomes this confirmation bias. Yeah, this is sad. Oh, Paul's angry with George, and all this the little things along the way that you see that sort of confirm what you're inclined to believe. Lifted at the end, the last 20 minutes, with this exuberant, joyous performance on the rooftop where it's the Beatles you love one last time, as it were. But mostly what I remember is that it felt sad, and I remember being in the audience that every time Yoko popped on the screen, it was the first time I experienced a room full of people hissing. And it was just like, this is weird. Yeah. It was something that I've tried to sort of remove myself from, well, this isn't them breaking up. This is them 18 months before they broke up or whatever. So can you see it through eyes and ears, not conditioned by believing that's what you're about to see? And that's the thing that I've tried, especially in more recent years, once the Peter Jackson thing was announced. It's like, well, what if this was the film Michael Lindsay Hogg put out in the summer of '69 as cut? Would I still feel sad watching it, would be downbeat? And mostly I would say, like we've talked about in the show previous, it's more the technical aspects that make it downbeat. It's the color is not popping, especially the Twickenham sequences and stuff. It is kind of downbeat, and they seem kind of lost and not high energy, except in little fleeting moments here and there. So I don't think it's a sad, depressing piece of work per se, only if you come into it watching it that way. And your experience might be different, because I'm not sure what you saw it, but you're even further removed from that. So what was it like when you saw it the first time, and when?
I think 14 or 15, I checked out Hard Day's Night and Let It Be from the library, the local library. And my fandom is a little different than some. I think I had that rockism attitude when I was 14, where I was like, I'm the cool girl who knows about rock, so cool. And I really didn't, I thought I did, but I didn't. And so I didn't have that perception that this was the end of the Beatles. I don't remember it that well. I remember watching Hard Day's Night very well because I was so fascinated by that.
You saw them back to back the first time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I just put them in. I think I also rented Fiddler on the Roof. So there was a lot going on in my interest at the time with theater and whatnot. And so we were introduced to the Beatles, it's on the radio, and it's already very old. And then it's
decontextualized.
Completely decontextualized. So finding the Beatles, I gravitated towards the black and white first, but then going through albums, it wasn't in order. I remember he's passed since, but one of my best friends in high school, he really encouraged my love of the Beatles when he gave me Sgt. Pepper, from Record Player. And so it definitely wasn't the same. I didn't have that story with them. I mean, I do in my own sense. I feel like now I have it after all my experiences in Liverpool and whatnot, but not in the same way. Definitely decontextualized. I picked and choose as I went what I liked and what I wanted to watch. So
I just would like to add, when you watched Let It Be, you knew the end of the story.
Oh, yeah.
When I first watched Let It Be, I didn't really know how it was going to end because it was back when it came out. So it was a whole different kind of looking back and seeing it and saying, oh, I really know what happens. But when I sat there and watched it the first time, I was really enthralled. I loved the shots of the pedestrians on the street. For some reason, that's the thing that always, the wind blowing, the coldness on the rooftop, and then the people looking up on the street. And that was my lasting memory. But, when I walked out of the theater from seeing that and I saw it in Boston, it was like, well, you really didn't know. You could feel and you thought, but I didn't know how that story was going to end. And so when you look at some of these things now, I mean, we didn't know what years later was going to happen to John Lennon. We didn't know the fallout with Yoko, which is what amazed me the most, frankly, of watching Get Back, is that I was one of those really bad people who just didn't like her and thought, oh, she broke up the Beatles, she took John away, she did that. And in seeing this now, my appreciation for her has definitely changed over the years, and we exchanged a few letters. She was always very, very lovely and nice and wrote and things. But watching it now, I thought she was really just there being supportive and was there because they were in love and just wanted to be together. I didn't see her, at least in the new film, meddling the way I always had perceived she was. So
I think Peter Jackson did her a solid favor. I think that he did her a lot of good in his choices that he made in the film, because if you've listened to all the Nagras, there's a lot more tape in his film, and there's obviously a lot more film than made it into his cut. He sort of downplayed a lot of what had been the issue ongoing. The one hint he has that he left in the film was when, after George walks out, and there's the scene where they're sitting around and Paul's discussing the John and Yoko issue and how the meeting had happened after George walked out, and they met at Ringo's house, and George walked out again because Yoko was speaking for John.
mm-hmm.
I think that they sort of minimized what really went down, which is that they were talking, Neil and Michael and Mal and Linda and everybody that was present and Ringo, about the John and Yoko problem. And they sort of tamped that down with just minimizing some of what Paul had to say about they're in love. But really, there was this great fear that John would choose between the Beatles and Yoko if pushed. So they did see it as a problem. I think it's sort of underplayed, and that's why you got all these headlines, the world owes Yoko an apology, because she wasn't being aggressively hands-on disruptive. But I think it's simply the editorial choices that Peter Jackson made. And maybe it was the pressure. You'd know this being a producer yourself. When you're feeling the implicit, if not explicit, weight of the people that are bankrolling this thing, of what they're going to want to see in it and what's going to make it acceptable and be released, you got to make sure they're happy and on board.
Without, Deb will be back, and she'll know exactly what I'm talking about here. But that feeling that Let It Be was the end, I didn't have the feeling that it was the end. I'll tell you what felt like the end. December 8th.
1980, yeah.
That was the end.
That was really the end. Absolutely. I agree completely. That was the end.
That was the feeling. I didn't get that from the other stuff. It was like, because remember, like you said, Deb, we didn't know the future. We didn't see that. So this happened. And it felt to me like they're in this spot. They're still making music. And then it kind of, life took over and all of that. But then there were things like on Saturday Night Live, they're going to get together, maybe. There was always that promise that maybe, or I heard that Paul went to see John. So there was always the
hope
mm-hmm.
that the spark would happen for something, for some event greater than all of us, to bring them back together again. There was that. But Carol, absolutely correct. It was December 8th that really signaled the
I don't even like to think of the date, but that's the thing. That was the end.
The end.
When they began being spoken of in past tense.
Yeah.
I was enough of a fan in the 70s as I was getting into them to be aware of multiple $1 million offers being put on the table. And then there'd be like these things floated in the news. The Beatles are going to get together for this cause or that cause and things like that. Camp Lucia. And it was sort of teasing things. We know now that they never had any intention, but there was that hope. You just had that expectation. Come December 8th, it's all over. Especially coming off the heels of John's finally recording again after years of silence.
Exactly.
And that was so delightful to listen, to hear anything that they did as individuals. Still smacked of the four of them. So to hear that and just to be back in love with hearing his voice and all of that, that was most heartbreaking. But anyway, we are here to talk about Get Back.
Coming into that, a year ago, before it dropped, he'd put out that 5-minute video. Did you guys see that, the Peter Jackson sneak peek?
I think so.
And what was your reactions?
Can't wait.
Yeah, exactly. Like, let's see what's going to happen.
God, it's on Disney. I'm going to have to subscribe.
Sure, that went on in millions of households across the world.
But they put out a thing that said, like, if you subscribe now, we'll give you a discount. So it's like I wrote down the specifics, and I did that. I'm still subscribed because I watch it every day. For now, I'm watching it. Here's what I do. I make supper.
Mm-hmm.
It's my dinner and a movie. And I watch it till the end of the day when they put the X. And then it's like time to turn it off. And then I go do something else. And I sit there and think about it. And I don't want to say every single day, because there are some times it's like I just need a break just to think about it, just to let it sink in. But I've gone through many emanations of absorbing it. Like at first it was like, oh, what? And then it's been this, and then it's been thoughtfulness, and then it's been observational. So all the thoughts and emotions in every way you could come to it. So now I want to take notes, because there's going to come a day where I'm going to have to say no more to Disney, not because of the money, but because, the season's going to change, just like when we grew up. And I'll be wanting to go back out to the farm, and I'm not going to watch it out at the farm. There's too many chores. So where do I leave it? I can't continue to watch it forever. And yet I feel like, why not? But then I'm not going to do that to it, because it's like a gem. It's precious. I want to just have to leave it sit for a bit. But I don't know how to keep it, because once I stop that streaming, it's gone.
Well, the Blu-ray's coming.
Yeah, the Blu-ray's coming.
Yeah.
But how do you play it? I'm very low-mo in terms of technology. I have a TV set with rabbit ears.
I have those too. When I saw the preview, Robert, I was really excited because, and Deb, I'm sure you guys will appreciate this, it shows John and Yoko reading a teen set.
Right. I saw that.
Yeah. Instantly, I called Robert and I was like, go to this. I think it was 420.
420, yeah.
Yeah, 420. Go to 420. Look at what they're doing. See? And so I could put it in, and I could put it in my research. So that was really exciting to me.
What a gift.
I know. Out of all the things he picked for the short preview, he picked that. And that was so important to me. So
it is a great visual to see his face peeking over his face on the cover of the magazine. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Deb, what was your reaction to the sneak peek?
Well, I was just excited to go back and see it, because anything that returns Beetle, I really feel this is the ultimate justification for me continuing to be a fan. I'm able to go back and to say to all these people around, to say to me, keep saying, oh, grow up already. It's just ridiculous. And it's too many years, and it's this and just whatever. And every time this happens, I'm able to say, hey, look, this still has value in our world today. And you have to stop and think and see the impact that everything from 64 and now continuing, I said, it continues. And, then they come back to me and they say, there's one particular person I'm thinking of, actually. Oh, anything to make more money. They reissue albums. They reissue this. They do that. All this just to feed the money machine. And I say, you know what? It is so far beyond that, because there are emotions and value and history. And I said, the sociological impact of it all. I said, this just shows what a lasting legacy the Beatles have on our world. And you just have to step back and respect that. And it's not always just a money thing. We want to see this. We want to know the truth. And we want to be able to understand different aspects about what was going on at the time. And even when the original Let It Be came out, we have to think about Kent State happened in 1970. There were people murdered on a college campus. I mean, there were all these issues happening. So bottom line for me is that when I saw that, I thought, justification again. Time to start talking about the Beatles and really what that did. And, as they always did, they opened up communication again. They brought certain topics up. So, I was just really excited. I was sad to see it take so long. Every time I would open up, the news or a trade paper and say, oh, Peter Jackson, a delay in this or a delay here or there. And I would be just so excited and then say, oh no. Anyway, I was so happy when finally we got the date. And I never watched Disney before. I have grandkids, but they don't live where I do. They live across the country. So I don't have a need really. And I wasn't a big Disney fan either growing up or what, I watched the classics, but that was it. So of course I was of the group who subscribed for the month on Disney. And guess what we did right after it aired, 4 days after? Bye, Disney.
Bye.
So I felt badly about doing it, but I had no need to go back and, watch it. And I look forward to the end of this month when it'll be, coming out again. Whether I sit there and watch it at home, I'm not really sure if I'm going to put it on and have dinner and watch the
Me, such a nerd.
again. Yeah.
Maybe bake a cake.
Yeah. But I might, if I had a few friends over, and love to put it on and just sit there. And years ago, I used to buy feature films at CBS. That was my job for 8 years when they had like Saturday night at the movies and Sunday night. And I would acquire the theatricals. And with my boss, I did that in the 8 years. We would sit in the screening room and we would talk through movies. And so I'm accustomed to talking because we talk about the set design and costumes and the cinematography and the lighting. So how I would really love to watch this again, if I did, was with a few people that we could sort of play it, but not have to sit there as I did so intently, grasping for every word and every notion that was made, but sit there and like talk through it, where we have conversation and like, and did you see that and see that? And what do you think? Whatever, boom, stop it a little, have a conversation and go on. I just feel that's how I'd like to see this again.
That's a great way to watch it. It opens the door to questions of how people experienced it. If people who've seen it more than once watched each episode straight through, did you see it piecemeal? Did you have to stop and absorb what you just seen? In my case, when I first watched part one, the TV, I'd forgotten, accidentally had the captions left on. And when I watched it after that without the captions on, it's like, I really need the captions on, because it's like a different viewing experience having it on versus not, because you're able to catch so much more. And when you don't have them on, there's a couple things that get put on the bottom of the screen, but that's infrequent. And there's so much more that you're not going to catch because it's all happening so fast. You wish life could be that way, but it was really a different experience. And then after that, I just watched it in little pieces here and there. Sometimes have it on in the background and just look at it once in a while, or you would just watch a half hour here, half hour there. But it is so unbelievably rich in terms of every viewing. Something fresh pops up that you didn't notice before, or something else will catch your attention. What about you guys?
When I decided to finally watch it, I took my time. I think we talked about this last time, ladies. Like, my fandom is very sacred to me, and there were so many reviews out about it and so much to say, and everyone was talking about it, whether it was about Yoko or Paul or whatever. I just went into a fog because I was like, no, I'll watch it when I watch it, and I want to watch it slowly. So all my friends were like, you watched it right already? I was like, no, not yet. I'm going to watch it when I feel in my place and I want to watch it. And that's exactly what I did. And I watched it slowly. I think I did a half of each one each time I watched it. And when I finally got around to the last one, because when Robert was like, have you seen it? Because I think he knew that I would take my time. Well, one, I can't rewatch it again for the first time. And so it's when I was a teenager and I decided that I loved Seinfeld. I waited as long as I could before it wasn't much to wait for to watch the final episode. Seinfeld fans will know on that one. I was like, okay, I waited a long time to end that because I didn't want it to end for me, even though it wasn't new. I didn't know, even with the beginning of when I was all out of context, I didn't know about Alan Klein. I didn't know about the break of the Beatles. So when I'm watching all the stuff at 14 or 15, I'm just starting to piece it together. But get back, I definitely cried a few times. It was so overwhelming to me. And I think it's so nice to step back and just be this fan and just really take it in and take it as personally as I want to. And I'm sure that you guys did the same, but it just, there's a lot. Because for you guys, you got to experience it as it was happening in real time. So I'm older than they were at this point in their time, finally past their ages. But in my mind, they're always going to be, I think even when I'm 90, they'll still be, 20 and older than me.
Right.
Or 27 and older than me. That was cool to watch.
I'm going to tell you something amazing. Ready?
Ready.
So here's the thing. The first time it was a watch through, it was like, oh, but I couldn't even articulate that much.
Mm.
That's how intense it was to just see that. And I was crying when George left. And, I had all the emotions I just it was just an emotional ride, the first one.
Mhm.
And then a couple of things started to occur. It's like, So then my analyzed brain started to come in. Okay, emotionally, I'm totally there. And it brought me all back. And I loved everything about it, but I couldn't even say the word love. It just was that deep. Then it was like, hey, there's no water bottles. That's cool. There's coffee cups or mugs, mugs, which brought me to this sense of civility and the decorum that went through the whole of what they did. I mean, we didn't see their personal lives, but at least as working people, they arrived for work. They arrived when they arrived. I was amazed that they were on a schedule. Never occurred to me, when you listen to the music, you're not thinking that somebody had to get up in the morning, have breakfast, go to the studio and create the song. You don't think that way. You just hear it and you're going, oh, I love that song. So I was amazed at the routine and the civility of the way and the order. Of course, the Britishness of that was amazing again. I loved that. And I loved the weaving in of the mundane. Oh, I got a doctor's, or I have a medical this afternoon. Or I was watching television last night. I was watching TV. And these are things that you can instantly relate to because that's the way we live our lives. We go to the doctor, we watch TV, and then you get up and you get back from out of the ether. I mean, that was the part that I can relate, but I can also see the genius. Mm-hmm. And then on the 10th viewing, it became like a psychedelic experience where I was looking at how the way the color was coming across. And it wasn't until they were at Savile Row, and there's this one shot of a bunch of electrical cords going to these boxes that I think are speakers in the control room. And it's like, the rug is green. Wait a minute. John's wearing a green shirt. George has green pants. They all have green. Wait, even Paul? All of them are wearing green. I went back on a read and I was reading the color of the whole thing from Twickenham back and forth. And I thought, okay, they throw that color into the background and you could see the way that their shirts were. And there was a cleanness or something simple about the Twickenham color presentation that reminded me of the early Beatles when they had the colorless coats, and the way that we would absorb the Beatles back then was, magazine, those weird off-color litho colors, and everything was very classy. And then point came where George is in a brown corduroy sport coat. Now this is starting to be transition. And then when they get to Savile Row with the camera work, and when they're there, it's almost like that reflected the later Beatles, because, there's George, they busted out. There's George wearing his floral, weird booties and a pink jacket. And if you looked at there was a certain type of T-shirt they were wearing that hugged the upper arm. And those came across to me. I'm telling you, it was psychedelic. It was like color slabs. Mm-hmm. And then those were juxtaposed against the silver on the electric piano and the brown of the guitar. And I thought, I don't know why, but the colors started to explain the story and started to get into the subtleties of their aesthetic and their genius. And then I thought, I got this compulsion, and I'm going to do this summer. There was this point where John was in the control room, and I looked at his arm, and I started to see the whole texture thing. So the early Beatles are without texture for me in terms of I draw, and I use a pen and ink, and I'm cross-hatching. And I thought, man, if I did John's arm, I would just do the contour, and it has this. It's like I could almost go to the Home Depot or something, or Lowe's or someplace. I'd get a color swatch, and I could match it to his arm color, and I would paint a room that color. I'm going to try to do that this summer. Anyway, then I thought, but Paul is I would take my pen and ink and I would cross hatch because he's got so much hair on his arms, and I never saw Paul having hairy arms before. He was always, so prim in the photographs. Mm-hmm. But then I thought, look at him. He's chewing his thing, he's chewing, and he's got his hair, and he's flipping his hair back and jumping over chairs, and he's jumping on the jungle gym. He's holding on to the scaffolding. And I thought, this guy is wild. Did you see him jump off? He jumped across a chair. He stepped onto the seat and jumped. And I thought, oh my God. And so it was a riot. Then it became this riot of, and that's where I got to. So in all these viewings, you talk about unpacking the layers or seeing the things or whatever. I've gone through the entirety of having an emotional response. I had no language, to starting to put language to it, starting to read and understand, getting from color to psychedelic to texture. And now it's just like, okay, now I'm just going to write down some snippets of this and that, and then I'm going to put it away because I do want to do a book. I mean, I've already internalized it to some degree because I see that there's some places I've been working on this book on grief. So now there are certain things that I watch that happened that just made me turn my pen a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of has pushed me into places that it's like I feel more like it should be, like I've always been, just go there and be playful and do something crazy. Why not? Because I see that Harry Paul jumping over a chair. It's just amazing.
I remember George tripping over a microphone.
Those are the top tier. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to see through and Ringo bored half the time and Ryoko slipping John some gum, just the way she needled him, the way she did it. And he finally just took it and he went, and he put his eyebrows up when he put it in his mouth. So little things like that are so wonderful for me. That's what I'm enjoying. That's where I'm at now. I'm at the crazy, I'm beyond psychedelia. Now it's kinetic and it's wonderful.
As a highly visually oriented person, Carol, do you look at what you were saying as a lot of it being deliberate choices on their part, or just things that happen to be random that we're then drawing meaning from?
I don't think John and Paul said, today I'm going to wear the green t-shirt. Are you going to wear the blue one? And then are you going to stand with the pink background? They just went through their clothes. Or how come George decided he wanted a purple velvet
bow tie?
I don't know, but I loved everything George wore in this.
I love everything Glenn Johns wore.
They were fantastic. So, they didn't coordinate. I think that was just like Ringo said, he was wearing a shirt that he'd worn in India. And I thought, okay, so he's got a closet full of stuff and they all have closets full of these costume outfits. They know they were on stage too. I thought George was trendy, probably because he was with Patty, but probably because that's the way he was. But I think that Paul is more classic, in his attire. John is a goof. He's a rocker. And Ringo is just fine, He's no problem. Anyway, being visual, I don't think there was any kind of like coordination. I think they didn't have stylists, They just sort of did. That's the other thing I liked. You see John helping lift a speaker into the room.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so non-pompous.
Yeah, that was amazing, seeing him do physical labor.
Yeah.
Did you guys catch the little visual by Ringo's drum baffles? He put up a piece of his kid's artwork.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I saw that.
Yeah. And he used Scotch magic tape.
Yeah.
The whole thing was just so unbelievably humanizing. I was wondering what you guys might have picked up, just possibly more than men being more attuned to the emotional way that these guys communicated with each other. What did you pick up on that? And was it anything new to you, or was it something you sort of intuited along the way just from being such hardcore Beatle fans?
Okay, I think you really hit the whole concept of what I loved about the show when you said, Robert, that it was humanizing. And I think that that's what I walked away with most, even in seeing them interact in their conversations and what they said, their reaction, their facial expressions, how, as you said, we saw them actually picking up speakers and moving things around. And I just felt that the communication that they had was just so natural. We have been so keyed into seeing them in clips, in press conferences, sitting, being interviewed, of Q&As, and how many times we really haven't been able to see them just connect as people sitting there, nodding to each other. Paul to say to John, what do you think? Or to George or whatever. And so I think it was, for me, their conversation was humanizing, and the fact that we got to see them as people and not sitting in a conference room being besieged by journalists or, just sitting on a TV talk show with questions. But this was a view into them and their personalities as people, I thought, versus through the whole thing, I did keep in mind that these were all people who were very aware, though, of who they were already in the world, their power and influence in the world, and that there were cameras rolling. I think, though, that by the end, I will say that I loved episode 3 the best, okay, for me.
Mm-hmm.
1 was a little difficult for me to sit through, and I can't really tell you why, but it was. 2 was fine, and I really started to enjoy it. And then when we got to 3, I really felt the whole sort of coming together kind of thing happening. Mm-hmm. And I just really enjoyed it. But I think that there was some self-consciousness of the camera being there. And then I felt they actually moved away from it. So the nods and the reactions to each other, I just loved seeing it. It was just so special.
And Deb, didn't you love how one of them would start playing something random and the other one would just jump right in?
Yeah. That was so beautiful, right? That was beautiful. And that was the essence of what really the Beatles, I think, for all of us was all about, and that what we loved about them and that we hoped to see, which we did in this, is to just see how Paul was doing a little something, and there was Ringo suddenly on the drums, and he was joining in, and it was wonderful.
The friendship.
Weren't you guys amazed? I was absolutely stunned at how much music they knew. They were rocking Chuck Berry and Beck and old standards from the 30s, and they knew them.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is what you get when you spend your entire youth playing together. You know the entire catalog of standards.
And covering a lot of songs.
Yeah.
That was really fascinating. It's like anytime they would go down memory lane, they're not talking about Shea Stadium. They're not talking about the Ed Sullivan shows. They're not talking about the things we look at as the big milestones. They're talking about the Top 10 Club in Hamburg. They're talking about the Cavern. And they're talking about this great wealth of cover material or the earliest songs that they ever wrote when they're teenagers, stuff they rejected. That's the most deeply embedded in their brains is that stuff. It's like the stuff that made the most impact and lasted with them the longest. I thought that was incredibly fascinating because when you think about your own life, what are your most vivid memories? Don't they tend to be your teenage years, your earlier years, as opposed to last week or 2 years ago or something?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I agree with you, Deb, the idea of the humanizing Robert and Carol. That's one thing for me is I always feel like at one point during Get Back, I relate with a different Beatle at one point during the moment. And I picked the Beatle that I think represents, that I feel like I embody the most sometimes, and that would be just the work ethic of Paul. But in episode 2 and 3, just the look on Paul's face and his eyes, because sometimes I have just a terrible time communicating what I really want to, so I kind of get quiet and it comes out through my eyes. And I could see it on his face when he was holding back what he wanted to say, what he was feeling, and it was in his eyes that he wanted to play live again. And I think that's so clear in the very end on the rooftop concert. He is just so excited to be up there. He's just so excited. That communication from him, I thought was very interesting. And they've been around each other. I'm sure they can all read each other very easily. And they all know what he's thinking, but you don't see that very much. And especially, I guess there's a point where you have to reel in what you want to say you're not 20 anymore. Well, you make up really fast. That was interesting to me, just to see the holding back at moments when they really do want to say something, and then other times not. So that was interesting to me.
It was fascinating to me to have this visual to accompany what I'd been hearing the audio of for years, because as Peter Jackson had said in our conversation, you're not getting the complete story there if you just have the sound to work through, or if you just have the printed words to read. You need that visual to really get closer and closer to what is actually happening in the moment. But it was the things that were nonverbal that I was picking up on way more than I expected to, especially between John and Paul, how they looked at each other, their gaze at each other, that unblinking, direct look, time and time again. If one of them was talking, the other was just full focus. And, John makes the joke that one time at Apple Studio when they're talking about Don't Let Me Down or No Darling, that it's like we're lovers. It's hard to not come to a similar conclusion about the way they're communicating with each other. That's very much way beyond what I would have expected at that point in their history, how tight that bond is still between them, and how, conversely, in the build-up at the end of episode 1 to George's walkout, and yes, part of it's the film craft of Peter Jackson focusing the back and forth quick cuts between John and Paul, having this tight bond and having a great time with each other, and George looking so isolated and distraught and not part of it and in pain. That's the kind of thing that with this visual, this wonderful bounty of great footage that you're getting that you never knew you would ever get to experience, you get a fuller understanding of the group dynamic between these guys. You certainly get the friendship. You certainly get, as you guys were describing, one of them starts the song, the others fall right into line. And they just have that kind of collective muscle memory of the music that they loved, as well as the joy they get out of playing that music in a way that it's not like they started to play Sgt. Pepper, that was much later and represented something different to them as an experience and as a shared thing that happened in their history. But I was really, really struck by, despite the years of them talking about, the Let It Be sessions, that was miserable, that was us breaking up, blah, blah, blah. No, it wasn't. You guys are in full display, your love for each other, your friendship. I think that was the thing that, and maybe Deb can attest to this, having seen it directly, being in the same room, when most Americans' first impressions of the Beatles were formed from seeing them on the Ed Sullivan stage, one of the biggest takeaways was they clearly looked like four guys that were friends, sharing a friend experience and having the time of their lives. And that was what made them so compelling. And so, I want to do this. They showed us the way. This is what I want to do with my friends. That dynamic still seemed to be there, despite the troubles and things that were coming into their lives by that point, is that there was still a great love between them. And it makes you wonder, how could they so walk away from it in the next year? Why wouldn't you want to hold on to that?
Right.
It's kind of like twins. How twins or siblings, you just sort of know when your brother or sister goes, that little gesture means, the history and everything about it. And so when you had brought up about how John said, it's like we're lovers, there was already a dictionary worth of understanding nonverbal going on before that point. Mm-hmm. John and Paul have been so in sync for, a decade by that point, even before?
Yeah.
And when you form friendships and connections, I noticed from raising a kid and from teaching is that the time when things get really embedded is during those early times. I never see my brothers very much, but when I do, all these years later, we spent most of our life, we've been together as children for a small period of years, but then the whole life goes by, 50 years. But just you spend 2 seconds with somebody from those early years, it all comes back.
Yeah.
And so I felt like these guys had they were welded, hardwired to each other. And there would be nothing. I never felt like they would ever betray each other, even after a breakup. They would never not be connected, even to this day. And when I heard that, when George was at the last of his cancer, he was at Paul's house. He died at Paul's house. So little things like that. And the bond and the connection, that's what came through also for me in the first viewing, is that this is forever. This is some kind of forever.
Right. And the familial aspect, not just that they're four brothers, but how welcoming. I was really surprised, and it was definitely kind of a joyous aspect to see little Heather comes into the sessions. Paul's been with Linda really as a serious couple only, for a few months at that point.
Right.
How welcoming they were to her and just accepting her as part of the family, and each of them in their turn having this bit of joy with her. It was really cool to see that. I don't know what I expected, but I didn't expect that, and it was really cool to see.
I thought it was amazing to see little Heather imitate Yoko on the microphone too.
Yeah.
She's a quick study.
Yeah.
That was so much fun, right?
That's so cool. And Yoko's face, at least the clip that Jackson shows,
Yeah.
she seems amused by it. Yeah.
I love that when she's taking in, when Yoko's doing her thing and Heather's all saucer-eyed, just taking it all in. It's like, give me a mic.
Ooh, I can do that.
Right.
That's so cool. So punk rock.
Yeah. Maybe that's the secret to Yoko's music. Anybody can do it.
End of part 1. Intermission.
Something About the Beatles. Created and hosted by Robert Rodriguez. Executive producer Rick Way. Title song by The Corgis.